Welcome back to Old School Sports and our Out of the Park Baseball 24 playthrough of the Buffalo Wings. The calendar has flipped to 2037. It's been a relatively quiet season, or more accurately, off season for the Buffalo Wings here as 2036 World Series champions. We've lost a couple of big free agents already, most notably the great Shamar Jeanneret. And we haven't done too much. We've signed one pitcher, got him signed today actually, Eddie Mosley, a veteran left-hander, 3-year deal worth a maximum of $6 million. Little front-loaded this year, and then team options for us the next couple of years. Certainly not a big-time pitcher at this point. He's wrecked physically, and his profile is relatively pedestrian. But he is a guy who, over the course of his major league career, has been a slightly above-average pitcher. He's a lefty, which we could use. And he's also a guy with a 4-pitch arsenal and 75 stamina that could hopefully fill in for us as a starting pitcher if we run into a situation where we need some help in the rotation. So between Mosley and the fact that we recently picked up 4 pitchers in the Rule 5 draft, feel like we've rounded out the edges on our pitching staff. So as we sit here on January 1st, there's really kind of only one hole we're still thinking about on our 26-man roster. And when we think about our outfielders, we're going to be bringing Bobby Bolig, Shamar Jeanneret, or not Shamar Jeanneret, we're going to be bringing Bobby Bolig, Tyreek Hardage, and Tim Gaglia back in the outfield from a year ago. But with Shamar Jeanneret and the always controversial James Wood, we've lost 2 outfielders / DHs, and we intend to fill one of those holes with the top prospect in our system and one of the top prospects in baseball in Joe Gallagher. But we still, in theory, have a spot open in the outfield where we could look for some help. And at least one commenter has gotten on me for not doing much this offseason, but with the fact that we have moved on from starting pitcher Jorge Carrillo and not offered him a long-term contract, we've got about $29 million available for extensions at this point. And as it turns out, our ace, Alexis Barajas, who's in his final arbitration eligible year, is looking for almost the exact amount of money we have left for next season as the average to sign an extension with us. And because I am going to do everything in my power to ensure that Barajas, who we gave up a lot to pick up in a trade with the Marlins a few years ago, is back with us after this season, that money for extensions, which is essentially money for 2038 contracts at this point, is sacrosanct to me and not something that I am going to mess with. So I am willing to make some more moves for free agents or for trades this offseason, but it's going to almost certainly only be people with either 1 year remaining on their contract or players who are willing to sign just a 1-year contract. And we have an offer out for an outfielder who fits that description a bit. Unfortunately, I only have a high scouting accuracy on him right now, so I'm waiting to see exactly what he looks like in a week or so when we get a scouting report back on him before potentially completing that transaction. So we'll see what his scouting report looks like, and I'll let you know what we're thinking on that end. Other than perhaps that trade and continuing to scour the free agent market for bargains in the coming weeks, The other big thing we're getting ready for is international amateur free agency, and we touched on some of the more attractive prospects at the end of our last episode. Quite honestly, the depth of the talent is not incredible this year, at least according to our scout. Only 4 pitchers who have 3-star potential or above, according to our scout, which isn't necessarily a very unique number. But our scout also only sees 4 out of 100 position players with 3-star or better potential. And I'm not in love with any of these 8 prospects that are allegedly the highest potential prospects available this year in international amateur free agency. So as some of you have kind of noted in the comments, this might not be a bad year to just try to bring through a number of prospects and hope that maybe we get some favorable talent change randomness with some of them. And I think that's the way I'm leaning. We've got another couple of weeks, exactly 2 weeks actually, until the signing period begins. And unless something changed materially in those next 2 weeks as far as our scouting reports, I think my inclination is probably to go along with the advice from some viewers and my own gut feeling and avoid the top end of the market in international amateur free agency this year, and perhaps try to put ourselves in a position where we could bring on 4, 5, 6 prospects into the Buffalo Wings organization. And before we start moving forward in the episode, we'll also just address a comment from 3/4 Badger to our last episode about if we've got the money to sign Barajas, why don't we just get him signed now? And I think that's a fair question because the goal is clearly to have him signed in the next 11 months or so before he potentially could hit free agency. As I mentioned, he's looking for about $29 million a year right now. And my thought is that that number could go down by a couple million, or it could go up by a couple million. Patrick DeBonis has noted that that certainly could happen over the course of this upcoming season. So as much as I want to have him back, if I can have him back when all is said and done at $25 million a year instead of $28 million a year or $32 million a year, certainly would like to do that. So we're going to continue keeping an eye on him and see if maybe we can get a little more value when we sign him to a long contract. If, as it turns out, the $29 million-ish a year that he's looking for right now is the lowest number that we're ever going to see, and 10 months from now he's looking for something like $35 million a year, clearly we will have left money on the table if we're going to sign him no matter what, which is probably going to be what we'll do. But it will also give us the opportunity to see this upcoming age 28 season and whether he possibly suffers some type of career-altering injury that would make us not want to sign him or only willing to sign him for a lot less money. As a 28-year-old who's an Iron Man in terms of his injury proneness, that's unlikely to happen, admittedly, but view it as kind of playing cards, and sometimes it's worthwhile to see a few more cards and keeping the hand alive to get some more information. So the hope is that the price may come down a couple $1,000,000 and that, as you often can, we'll be able to sign him for a couple $1,000,000 a year less than even what he's requesting. But if that doesn't materialize, at the very least, like I said, we'll get to see another season of him. Hopefully he'll avoid injury, and then we'll try to get him locked up between the end of this 2037 upcoming season and the beginning of free agency in a worst case scenario, assuming that he's healthy and effective this year and we don't get him signed over the next 10 months or so. And we've got the scouting report back on the outfielder I had mentioned that I was thinking about trading for, and it's the veteran Dylan Carlson. And we now do have very high scouting accuracy on him. And he is not a player we're going to be building around for the long term if we do make a trade for him. He's 38 years old. He's fragile. His speed is gone. Those are the negative things to say about him. Oh, and he's making $18.4 million despite being a guy who was a below average offensive player in 2 different stops last year. So those are the negatives. The positives are he's still a decent defensive outfielder. He still has a decent-ish batting profile despite the down year last year. And he's a switch hitter with some versatility. And he's a guy who, against left-handed pitching, looks like he could still perhaps be a useful player. Would prefer not to play him against right-handed pitching, if at all possible. But if we have him spend a little time in right field and left field in spring training, even though he's got low adaptability with his outfield skills, even though, to be fair, he's got low adaptability and is 38 years old, so I don't think he's going to pick up new positions incredibly quick. But he is enough talent that we could probably turn him into a more than passable right fielder or left fielder over the course of spring training. And he could potentially be someone who starts 30, 35, maybe 40 games for us against left-handed pitching and gives us a decent bat off the bench. We're certainly not interested in spending $18 million a year for him. But as I mentioned, with the departures of Jenneret and Wood, we do have a spot in the outfield. And among the players who are on the trade market, kind of feel like the veteran center fielder Carlson, who has been the most valuable player of a couple of playoff series and also won an MVP award, might not be a bad guy to bring on board as a 5th outfielder for us. Over the course of his major league career, he's been a bit above average as an offensive player. Probably hasn't had quite the career that fans in St. Louis might hope he ends up having. But he still has had a very long and overall effective major league career with over 2,000 hits, closing in on 500 doubles and 250 home runs and 1,000 ribbies. Certainly not a Hall of Fame career, but a career that has made him a lot of money. So, as I mentioned, we had offered a trade for him, but we didn't want to potentially execute on it till we got his scouting accuracy up to very high. And he has regressed a little bit in this scouting report. We thought that his contact was still 55 when we only had high scouting accuracy. And we thought that his outfield range was a 65 when we only had high scouting accuracy. So he's not quite as good as we had hoped. But he's still potentially a useful player. And we had made a trade proposal to Boston where they would retain 80% of his contract. So that, means we're on the hook for less than $4 million to him next year. And it's the final year of his contract, so we're not making a long-term commitment to him. And we honestly don't have to give up any big-time players. A 37-year-old and a 32-year-old in our minor league system are just guys that we've signed to minor league contracts for organizational depth. And then 2 middling prospects, 24-year-old Kimani Baptiste, who we picked in the 13th round in 2031. looks like at best a fifth outfielder for us. Split last year between High A Jamestown and Double A Utica, and although he did combine for 21 homers between the two levels, certainly did not set the world on fire, and he'll be 25 the middle of next season. And then left-handed starter Marquis Bethea, who we picked in the 14th round that same year, another guy who's going to be turning 25 years old the middle of next year, was 14-9 in Double A Utica this past year, but had a 5.20 ERA. Now his SIERA of 2.85 was materially better. But looking at the fact that he's closing in on 25 years old, we think he's pretty much fully developed. He does have a 5-pitch arsenal and above average stuff, but his movement and his control are both well below average. Well, not well below average, but his movement is below average, and his control is potentially problematic at a 40. He does throw hard, but just with the low movement and the below average control, not the type of guy that we tend to build around if we can avoid it. So I don't mind including him either. I don't think Carlson is a world beater, but again, we're not looking for him to be that. We're looking for a one-year guy who can be a fifth outfielder for us. And with the fact that his range and his error rating are both pretty good and he has a decent arm, feel like, as I said, in spring training, we can probably get him trained up at least at one corner outfield position to be decent, and maybe get a couple hundred at-bats out of him starting against right-handed pitching, hopefully playing a decent defensive outfield for us, and then being a potential defensive substitute in the outfield, switch hitter for pinch hit opportunities off the bench, and a guy who could hopefully at least be respectable offensively if we had some injuries in the outfield and needed to play him more frequently. So it's not a huge move, but we are going to go ahead and complete that trade here, bring Carlson onto the team. Fans are happy to have him on board. Leaves us with a little bit less money to play with this season, but as we talked about, doesn't touch our money at all for next season. And since we couldn't really find an outfielder or, quite honestly, any position players that we were that intrigued with in the Rule 5 draft, feel like bringing Dylan Carlson on board to potentially be the 24th, 25th, 26th man on our roster. And as I talked about, a fifth outfielder is not the worst thing for us as a franchise. And the Hall of Fame voting was completed. Jose Altuve, with 92% of the votes voted in, ended up just short of 3,000 hits, but a .292 career hitter, 325 homers, 345 steals, WAR of 67, despite some pretty poor seasons in Atlanta towards the end of his career. So Altuve, with a lot of hardware, is a Hall of Famer. Kind of interesting to look at this. Several people that, if I was betting, would end up in the Hall of Fame based on where their careers are right now. Manny Machado, Bryce Harper, Garrett Cole, and Aaron Judge, all still not Hall of Famers, which I would tend to think, even though most of those guys probably have another 5 to 10 years in the majors to write their full stories, I would be pretty surprised if 14, 15 years from now, none of Machado, Harper, Cole, and Judge are enshrined in Cooperstown in the real world. And we finally made it to the start of international amateur free agency. We'll take a look at some of the top prospects that we're thinking about. David Lazaya is a guy who I think most likely ends up as a real nice arm out of the bullpen. If that changeup doesn't develop, though, he is a bullpen guy. Looking for about $1.5 million, so a bit expensive in my view for a reliever, but still think that he could be a really good reliever. So would consider him if we could get him for around that amount. Juan Rojas, 17-year-old starting pitching prospect. He is a guy that does look to have the arsenal of a starter. His stuff could be off the charts. Movement and a control are the potential issues with him. At $1.5 million, I think we'd certainly happily bring him on board. My hunch is he's going to end up going for a lot more than that. Juan Asensio is a starting pitching prospect who's looking for $3.2 million already. If that changeup doesn't develop, he's a reliever. Given the amount of money he's looking for, not really someone that we're going to pursue actively. Juan Picado, another starting pitcher who's going to likely end up as a reliever, looking for $1.9 million. So among the high-end pitchers, would consider Lozaya or Rojas, but not necessarily in love with either of them. If we could get them for $1.5 million, sure, would love to have them on board. But if they end up going for $3.5, $4.5, $5+ million, we'll probably move on. A handful of other guys that we've been scouting more aggressively recently. Alejandro Ayala is a starting pitching prospect. Has a potential 6-pitch arsenal if everything develops. Could have slightly above average stuff, really good control, and acceptable movement if he completely develops. And he's also only looking for $550,000. So he's a guy we'd consider bringing as a, don't want to say bargain basement type player, but as a more reasonable guy. Similar to Lozaya and Rojas, if we can get him around what he says he's looking for, fine. If that price goes up 4 or 5 times, probably not somebody we would chase. Simeon Minelli, similar prospect, a guy who only is going to have a 4-pitch arsenal, but in general, those 4 pitches are expected to be a bit better. Could be a 3-pitch guy if the changeup doesn't develop. Like some of his personality traits, like that he's 18 years old, close to 19, so he is older, but like that he is already throwing in the high 90s, like that he's durable. In a perfect world, he's above average in stuff, movement, and control. Says he's only looking for $220,000 at that type of price. If he's a guy that we could sign early, would certainly not mind bringing him into the system. Luis Moreno, another guy, good personality traits, soon to be 17 years old, throws in the mid-90s, probably only ends up with a 3-pitch arsenal, and a guy who, if he fully develops, looks to be average to slightly above average in the 3 main pitching ratings. Looking for $650,000, so again, if you can get him for $500,000, $600,000, $700,000, probably a decent investment. If his price ends up going higher, he's a guy that we're a little less interested in. So I feel like between Lozaya, Rojas, Ayala, Minelli, and Moreno, there are definitely options to push among the pitchers. It's just a matter of figuring out which buttons we want to try to press here. Now turning to the everyday players, the 2 big guns in the draft are a couple of right fielders. Harley Bloggs out of South Africa. Looks like he could certainly have an above average bat and be a interesting prospect as a right fielder. Just turned 17 years old at $1.8 million. Not a bad guy to sign. Tend to think he's going to end up going for a big chunk of money. Similar situation with Vaughn Duncalf out of Australia. Says he's only asking for 1.4. My hunch is that there ends up being a bidding war for his services as well. Another guy who could have a pretty interesting hitting prospect with or hitting potential with some good home run power. So at the numbers that they claim they're looking for, those guys would be interesting as the top 2 everyday player prospects available, I tend to think they're going to end up going for $4.5 to $5.5 million when all is said and done. And I don't know that I want to spend that kind of money on either of them. I'm pretty confident actually that I don't want to spend that type of money on either of them. So I feel like maybe just avoid even getting in the bidding war and assume that other teams will spend the next several weeks trying to get them signed. Luis Ortuño, 17-year-old center fielder out of Venezuela. More outfield range than the other players. In a bat that at its top end probably isn't quite as good, but he's very young, just turned 17, is durable. But he's also looking for $2.2 million. So another guy who's probably going to be in pretty high demand and not all that exciting to me. El Banco Guerreri, third baseman out of Venezuela, like some of the personality traits. Balanced bat that's durable. If he gets better defensively, he could be interesting-ish as a third baseman. Not looking for a ton of money. And then the last guy that we've been scouting most recently is a center fielder, Edgar Zelaya, 16-year-old out of Colombia. The bat is the big question, whether he's going to be able to hit enough to play in the majors. But I like the durability. I like the speed. And he's got decent outfield range as well. Zelaya at $800,000 is looking for decent money for what he is. So as I think about these guys and which direction we should potentially go, I'm a little more intrigued by the pitchers than I am by the hitters. Could argue maybe make an offer to El Banco Guerreri now just because the league interest in him is a little lower and he's not looking for as much money. As I said, if Blogs, Duncalf, or even Ortuño go for the money that they're looking for, they're decent buys, especially if you could get two of them, which theoretically you can do with what their demands are. But as the three most highly regarded position players available, I don't think they're going to end up going for that kind of money. As I said, I think they're going to all go $4.5, $5+ million. And I just don't really want to waste my time finding that out when there are some pitchers who are mildly intriguing to me. Among the top two, feel like Lozaya is a guy who could be an excellent arm out of the bullpen when all is said and done. With that type of stamina, certainly a guy who could give you over 100 innings out of the bullpen in a stopper type of role. Rojas, I love the fact that he could be a starting pitcher with just insane stuff. So I really do like both of these guys. I don't think we get either of them for $1.5 million, but I don't mind trying to keep that conversation open. So I am going to meet the demand on Lozaya and submit $1.5 million offer to him. And we're going to do the same thing with Juan Rojas as well. I don't think we ultimately sign either of them at that amount. They could both, as 5-star prospects, be guys who end up going for $4.5, $5.5 million. But we're going to at least try to take a lot of shots on goal with the pitchers in this international amateur free agent period, to mix our metaphors. So we've still got $1.75 million left, which in theory is enough to make offers to these other three guys. And that's exactly what we're going to do. Interest is only average for Alejandro Ayala. So he says he's looking for 550. We're gonna actually just offer him $500,000 and see what he has to say about that. Simeon Minielli with the weird AK-77 nickname is the guy who's looking for the least among any of these guys at 220, but league interest is supposedly going to be very high in him, and we don't have the most established relationship with him. So we are actually going to go a little higher on him, offer him $250,000 and see what he has to say about that. And we're going to cap things out with Luis Moreno, who's looking for 650. Like the personality. And we'll offer him exactly what he's looking for. So we are just kind of spraying the market right now. We're certainly not going to sign all 5 of these players, as much as I'd love to dream that that could be possible. But wanted to get the conversation started early on all 5 of these pitching prospects. You can see we've got $4.4 million offered to the 5 of them. Only $350,000 left to spend. Don't know that we're going to sign any of them for what we've offered. At the very least, if Lozaya or Rojas ends up going for big money, hopefully we'll find out about that sooner rather than later. And then we can decide if we're really in love with one of them to throw a lot of money at them, or maybe more aggressively pivot to the strategy that I kind of outlined earlier in this episode, where we try to ensure that we come out of this international amateur free agency period with 4 or 5, maybe 6 lottery tickets, even if we don't think the best case upside of some of those guys is quite as high as the more highly regarded and expensive prospects. And not surprisingly, just a couple of days into this international amateur free agent signing period, Ayala and Moreno supposedly favor our offers, but the 2 big ticket items, Lozaya and Rojas, want more money, as does Minielli. So I think conceivably we can come back and make another offer to Minielli, and then we've got to see what Rojas and Lozaya are looking for, and we can probably only go a notch higher on one of those 2. Rojas, who does have a chance to be a starter, looking for $3.2 million. Not surprising that the guy who is a true starting pitching prospect looking for big money. Lozaya, who, as we talked about, is really a reliever. Maybe he gets lucky and that changeup develops, but I think you have to go after him, thinking of him as a high-end bullpen arm. And he's looking for $2.6 million. So that's a lot of money. But it's something that we could manage either of those. But Minielli, who is a guy who could be a starter, and we like the fact that he throws pretty hard. Now, admittedly, he's old for a international amateur free agent prospect. He says he's looking for $550, so his price has gone up significantly. That said, we're willing to get an offer out to him at $550. He's still a lot more reasonable than those other guys. And if we're able to bring Minielli on, or Minelli, if I would figure out how I can read and pronounce things properly, if we can bring him on as a true starting pitching prospect, since Lozaya is looking for less money, I think we'll stay engaged with him. $2.6 million. I don't think I'll go higher than this. I think I'll maybe pivot to some of those batting prospects if this doesn't work out. But at this point, we'll meet the demand. And he says he wants more now, $2.64 million, $2.68 million. So he's kind of playing games with us. Doesn't seem like he's all that serious. $2.75 million. claims that he really likes our organization and he'd love to come play for us. I have a feeling he's going to come back to us and say that he wants even more money next time around, in which case we will likely move on from him and pivot to some position players in addition to some of these pitching prospects that we've made offers to. And both Lozier and Minielli have already come back and said that they want more money. Minelli, why do I call him Minielli? I don't know why. Says he's looking for $750. And Lozier at this point, he's got an offer greater than our remaining bonus pool. So he's got he's got at least a $4.75 million offer, most likely to be a reliever. So we will move on from him, circle back to Rojas, and he's got a max offer that we can't beat. So the top end guys are definitely going for some bucks. Have to wait to hear from Ayala and Moreno. We are going to re-engage with Minelli then. Says he's looking for $750. So get that offer out to him. So we've still got offers out to 3 of the 5 pitchers. The 2 big ticket items we're going to move on from. And with that, we do have $2.85 million left to spend, so we can check in on the batters. I tend to think both Bloggs and Duncalf are probably looking for more than we can possibly pay. Actually, Bloggs barely over $2 million, so that's marginally interesting. Duncalf says he's only looking for $800,000. That's tempting. Ortuño, $1.44 million. Seems like everyone had the same thought as me, that the pitchers were much more interesting than the hitters this year. Guerreri looking for $600,000. I think I'll throw a couple of offers out there. Duncalf at $800,000, sure. Yeah, now he's already saying that he wants more than that. $850 to Duncalf. I would take that in a second. I don't think he will. Guerreri at $600,000. Yeah. Of course, he wants more too. So you can tell that these guys are going to end up getting bid up most likely. $650 he's willing to listen to. And that still leaves us with $1.35 million additional to potentially invest in people. Edgar Zelaya. I don't know that I want to pay $800,000 to him right now. We still technically now have offers out to 5 players, 3 pitchers, and the 2 position players that we just made offers to. I can't imagine that Guerreri and Duncalf are actually going to sign for these amounts. But at this point, we'll try to keep as many negotiations going as possible in a hope that maybe we can sign, say, 3 of these 5 guys that we've got offers out to right now when all is said and done. And we do finally have a signing, which is good because Ayala has come back and said that he wants more money. But the starting pitching prospect, Luis Moreno, like his personality, throws in the mid-90s. Think he's a guy with 3 average to slightly above average major league pitches if everything develops. Stuff, movement, and control, all average or a little above if he fully develops. Not a blue chip prospect, but if he fully develops, he's a useful 5th starter, and maybe there's a chance, particularly given the good personality, that you get a little lucky with him. So as a guy who we brought on for $650,000, we've got 1 player signed now, and we've still got a number of other irons in the fire. See what Ayala is looking for here. He was only $500,000 before. 650, so we can certainly afford that. We'll meet that demand and submit that offer to him, which still gives us one guy signed and 4 others that we're still talking to. And one of the big-time prospects, Rojas, is off the board. He was the 17-year-old lefty who potentially has just incredible stuff. Ended up signing with the Phillies for the $4.75 million that would have been our maximum. And both of the position players that we made offers to, Guerreri and Duncalf, have circled back with us saying that they are looking for more money now. So at this point, 2 of the pitchers, Ayala and Minelli, still favor our offers to them. But we're going to have to figure out whether we want to offer more to Guerreri or Duncalf. Right now we've got $2.7 million to potentially spend, so we can see exactly what they're looking for. Duncalf at $1.4 million, still not bad. Harley Blogs at this point looking for almost $4 million, so we'll move on from him. Guerreri says he wants $1 million. So we can afford to make another offer to both of those guys. Duncalf claims that he loves us, but not going for the money that we're offering, or that he says that he'll sign for. $1.45 million he's willing to think about. And Guerreri claims that $1 million will do it. We've only got $250,000 additional to play with, and he, not surprisingly, is playing with us, looking for more. $1.05 million he'll think about. So we've got 3 guys who allegedly favor our offer, and 1 guy that we're waiting to hear from, in addition to the pitcher that we've signed. So we're trying the high volume plan this off season, but we're still playing at the higher end of the IAFA market at this point. As I said, I don't think we end up with all 5 of these guys signed, but if we end up getting 3 of the 5 signed, not the worst case scenario. And to get 3 of these 5 at this point, it only means we need 2 out of 4, 50%, since we've already got one of the pitchers signed. And as we're waiting to hear back on these international amateur free agents, Jorge Carrillo, who came up in our system, was a former international amateur free agent, signed with us. Didn't end up signing for a ton of money, although the numbers do go up after the $11.5 million this year. But 6 years, $82.2 million, so a little less than $14 million a year for 6 years. I like Carrillo. I like the Iron Man. He's very popular in the clubhouse, was popular with the fans, and he had some really nice years for us with a career 64-26 record and 3.70 ERA. But if we signed him, it was going to be difficult, if not impossible, to bring Barajas back. And Carrillo is a solid 3rd or 4th starter, while Barajas is an ace. So given the budgetary constraints we face, we had to make a hard decision, and Carrillo is gone. Fans are not happy. Fortunately, fan interest still at least at 100. It was good that we did end up making him the QO, because we'll get a supplemental 1st round pick for losing him. Guerreri now looking for more money. David Lozaya is the guy who we think ends up being a high-end reliever, and he signed with Detroit for $4.852 million, so more than we could even afford unless we had traded for some IAFA cash. So now the question is whether we can make another offer that Guerreri will even think about. I think it's going to be very borderline whether we can afford it. 1.7 million. Yeah, we can only get to 1.25 million. So I think at this point, I like Guerreri, but I don't love him. I'm not going to chase him at that price. Ortuño probably out of our price range. Yeah, he's looking for 2.4 now. Harley Blogs, I'm assuming, is well out of our price range. Yep. So Edgar Zelaya, we'll see what he's looking for at this point. 850,000, that's a number we can afford. Since he's been kind of lingering a bit, I'm going to see if he'll think about 750. And he's at least willing to listen to that. So we'll put an offer out to him, which puts us in a situation where we've still got offers that are live on the table with 4 guys and a little bit of money to still spend if we need to increase some of those offers. I think it's unrealistic we'll get all 4 of these guys, but we can definitely get 2 of them if we're willing to dump all the money that we've got left into 2. And in a perfect case scenario, maybe we can thread the needle and come up with 3 more of these guys before all is said and done in the IAFA period. And we did just get a second signing with Simeon Minelli, starting pitching prospect. Like the durability, like that he throws in the high 90s. He is older, as we've talked about, has some good personality traits, though. 750,000, which was more than he was allegedly looking for at the beginning. But we've got 2 decent pitching prospects with some potential signed, which is positive. Don't think that either one of them is a star, but if they develop to what we think their maximum potential is, they're certainly both useful major leaguers. And as I said, sometimes with the international amateur free agents, I think you try to do what we're doing this year and bring in as many prospects as possible and hope that you get lucky with one of them who ends up being even better than your scout's best case scenario. And Vaughn Duncalf is looking for more money now. I think that will be probably tough for us to connect on with him. I'm guessing is one of the top hitting prospects in the game. He's probably looking for more than we can afford. Yeah, 2.6 million. We can go to 1.95 million. I'm guessing that number is not going to be attractive at all to him. But we will at least throw it out there and see what he has to say. Yeah, he's looking for 2.6. So right now with the other offers that we have outstanding, we are not in the mix for him. But Ayala and Zelaya, we'll see what happens with those 2. And wonder where we are with Guerreri at this point now with Duncalf looking for more. Guerreri at 1.7 million, that is a number that we can afford. So I think maybe we pivot back to him from Duncalf, who I think is out of our range at this point. We'll even offer him a little bit more, 1.75. He doesn't really want to sign with us. 1.78. Says he doesn't want a lot of money, but he does. 1.85 million. I think he's going to end up coming back and wanting even more, and we're going to move on from him too, but we'll wait and see. And now the third pitcher that we'd like to end up with, Alejandro Ayala, looking for more money. 1.3 million. So that's not a number that we can afford right now. I think if things fall apart with Guerreri and Ayala is still out there, maybe we give that money to him. But right now we have I don't want to say boxed ourselves in, but we are in a situation with the money that's out to Guerreri that we can't meet Ayala's demand. If we find out what's going on with Zelaya, though, I think if Zelaya comes back and says he's looking for a lot more money, that would allow us to potentially have enough to go after Ayala in addition to Guerreri. And Guerreri has come back now and said that he's looking for more money, so that'll let us pivot to Ayala. We did get Zelaya signed, not the hugest prospect in the world, as we talked about. I like the speed, like the durability. The outfield range is fine. Question is whether he's going to ever hit enough. But as another lottery ticket for $750,000, not the worst situation in the world. So we've got 2 pitchers and an outfielder signed at this point. And we've got probably whoever we're going to end up spending the most on is where we are with the money. I don't think there's a ton of value in Ayala at the money he's looking for as our most expensive guy. But at this point, a third starting pitching prospect would not be the worst thing in the world. And we are in a situation where if we potentially are willing to only end up with 4 guys at the end of this, we can offer him $2.2 million. So we're going to meet that demand and submit the offer to Ayala and see if we can get a third starting pitching prospect signed here. And Alejandro Ayala did sign that contract for $2.2 million. So he's certainly the most expensive of the 4 prospects. Really just became a supply and demand issue with him. But that does give us a 4th player signed during this international amateur free agent period. So I don't hate with where we are. We've still got $400,000 left. So we've got the opportunity to play at the lower end of the market and maybe add a 5th or 6th player. But we can also perhaps get creative and see if there's a team out there that's maybe interested in still pursuing a Duncalf or an Ortuño or even a Guerreri and could use some money to help get him there. So I think, quite honestly, I'm likely to peruse the trade market a bit and see if anyone has a strong bid for some of that cash that we have left. But we've ended up with 4 players. Ayala, as I said, the most expensive guy who could, when all is said and done, have a 3 to 6 pitch arsenal of major league quality pitches. Could be a useful major league pitcher. Zayala, the center fielder, we've talked about him a lot. Like the speed, like the durability, like the outfield range. Question is whether the bat ever develops. Manelli is a guy that I like a lot. Need the slider to develop to get him to the 3-pitch arsenal as a starter. But he's durable. He's got some good personality traits, throws hard, and if he reaches his full potential, certainly a useful major league pitcher. And last, but certainly not least, was the first guy we signed, Moreno, who's a similar situation, probably a 3-pitch guy, maybe a 4-pitch guy, has some positive personality traits, and got my pop-up here of Bing somehow. But he's got some positive personality traits, and in a perfect case scenario is a guy who is a useful major league pitcher. So I feel like we've got 4 pretty decent players signed at this point as we get ready for spring training to be starting in about a month. happy with where we are with the IAFAs. As I said offline after this episode, I'm going to be perusing the trade market and see if maybe there's something interesting we can do there. We're also going to continue perusing free agency, see if maybe there are some bargains available now that players have been out on the market for a decent time period. Jackson Holiday, not a horrible utility infielder. Don't love the fragility, don't love some of the personality issues, and don't love that he'd kind of have to be trained up a bit to be a useful utility infielder, but certainly at the money he's looking for, could offer us something useful. Before we finish up the episode, we'll check in again on the man Barajas and see what his demand looks like. And it's gone up. We knew that could go against us. It's gone up in terms of the dollars by about $2.5 million a year, and it's also gone up in the years to a 9-year contract. So as I said, we're going to be patient. We've got the control of Barajas for this next season since he's signed his arbitration deal. It's likely that that demand will fluctuate in the coming months. Our hope is that it fluctuates both down in addition to up. But as I said, in a worst case scenario, if he ends up being a lot more money, at least we'll get to kind of see how this year goes for him and make sure that he's perfectly healthy when that new contract potentially kicks in 2038. If we have to wait till the end of the season to lock him up. So, been an interesting episode. Made a trade, signed 4 international amateur free agents, and watched the price of our potential star pitcher go up pretty materially, given that he had not thrown a pitch during the time of the episode. So, we'll see how our negotiations with Barajas go, likely over the next several episodes and into the regular season. But in our next episode, we will hopefully sign a few more players to give us some organizational depth, maybe find a bargain or two in free agency, maybe find a guy who can help us in the trade market for some of that international amateur free agent money that we've got left. And then last but perhaps most importantly, play through spring training and figure out what our 26-man roster is going to look like as the new season begins. Until then, thanks so much for watching and hope you have a great day.